Well, we have finished another tale of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and as we are so fortunate to be able to do each time, we have the author back on to discuss Dust of Dreams. Let's welcome Steven Erikson back to the show. Hi, Steven.
Hello. How are you?
Doing well.
I gotta say, I think before we began, you or somebody in the community, or maybe one of your comments mentioned, like, oh, maybe the next time we talk is after the full series because it's a two-parter. And I just wanted to say thank you for. I don't think that I could possibly keep it all in my head to wait till the end of book 10. So I'm really happy we're having this discussion so that I can make sure that I can get out as much as I
can't believe he kept it in his head. That's
I
right.
know. Oh my goodness.
Well, it's not there any longer. So once it pours out onto the page, it's just it leaves this empty, shrinking space, and my head's been getting smaller every year.
Well, I think that maybe leads to the first thing I want to talk about, which is I think one of our listeners also posted the question about splitting the final novel into two big parts. When did you know that was going to happen? How long were you planning for that? And was that a difficult decision to make?
No, well, I knew very early on, I think, and one of the reasons was my sense of, I guess, obligation. My feeling was that if a reader is going to stay with me for those first 8 books, or rather, stay with me for the series until we get to the conclusion, then I needed to make sure that the conclusion was proportionate. So I needed that payoff to be as fully realized as possible. And that's when I realized that Dust of Dreams was going to be setting things up. And it's setting up the notions of what Tavore is up to. And then basically the novel is one long existential crisis for a lot of the characters, right? Especially the soldiers, especially the Bonehunters. And then I had a sense that I really don't like doing cliffhanger style endings. I don't like reading those books either. They drive me crazy. So I didn't want to do a cliffhanger. But then I realized that if I wanted to keep things proportionate in terms of the payoff compared to the investment of the reader, it was going to have to be 2 books. And I was going to have to split it.
So a little specificity from one of our community questions from a recurring person, name ever shifting. This is from Heinous Hardtack. So early on, I suppose you said that Malazan Book of the Fallen was always planned to be a full 10-book series. But according to them, technically it's a 9-book series where one of them is really, really long. Was that lucky being like the 9 and 10? Or was that accounted for in your initial math? Or just you getting there and making sure the setup was big enough? You were like worthy of.
Oh, sorry, temporarily lost.
We lost him.
There you go.
There he is.
That's okay.
There you go.
Yeah,
we're still good.
I don't know. I mean, it's a 10-book series in the sense of the contractual specifications.
Gotcha.
Right. So I had 10 titles, and so in that sense, that's basically what we worked out.
There's a quote that you wrote in answer to a question on the Tor website several years ago, now reactormag.com. But I wanted to read this to you because it delighted me, and I wonder if you have any further recollection of it. You wrote, "No matter how many times I said online and elsewhere that Dust of Dreams was the first half of a very big book, I still got furious emails from readers denouncing the lack of conclusion. In fact, one reader wrote to berate me after apparently assuming that Dust of Dreams was the final book in the series. Imagine standing in that guy's shoes, thousands of pages invested, and then I just seemingly kill everyone, and most of them off stage. Why, I'd go gunning too. It was a long rant, I recall, and I did respond by pointing out that The Crippled God was already out, and he might want to read it. Never heard back."
I don't even remember writing that, but yeah.
Tickled
Yeah,
me to read
there
it.
was there was a lot of there was heat that came up from that, but
Yeah, water under the bridge now, I'm sure. But
I guess people hear or don't hear, I guess, what they want to hear
Mm-hmm.
or not want to hear. So sometimes you can lay it out as clearly as possible, and it just goes over. They're thinking about something else, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Did you know that?
expectations.
Did you? Were you always aware that you were going to have to write an author's note at the beginning, saying, "Hey guys, chill,"
Uh,
or?
Is that a newer edition?
I don't remember. I think by that point, I realized that it would probably be a good idea to write an author's note at the beginning of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you mentioned, this leading into Tavore. Tavore is a character I love and is so intriguing because as a reader, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we've ever been in her mind, which has always positioned her as this mysterious woman, but with a vision. Everybody else knows she has a vision. She knows things we do not. In this book, more than the others, I also noticed that more characters, even ones we do get to ride in the minds of, are holding information that we don't get to see. When do you decide that it's better for a character to hold on to that intel versus sharing it with the reader in some way?
Um, how do you decide? I guess I'm thinking about it, it's kind of instinctive, but so how would I deconstruct that? You only reveal what you absolutely have to reveal um, to deliver, that aspect of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it's one of the things that, when I'm teaching in workshops and stuff, a lot of beginning writers, they overwrite. They overwrite their characters and they overwrite their scenes and their exposition. Um, in the belief that you got to all get it out onto the page. And I would always basically argue that no, you want to be a reluctant storyteller. In other words, you want to keep everything as cagey and collective as you possibly can, and only reveal what you have to reveal. And I think one of the effects of that is it allows the reader to carry more of the story with them, because it's not being spoon fed to you, and so you're left with um, elements that are waiting for resolution, and that resolution is the promise within the books that it's coming. And so I think it almost it encourages greater participation in the reader, rather than just passively absorbing the pablum of everything you need to know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's true or not, but that's my theoretical sort of approach to these things. Yeah, I really want to be I want to be cagey, um, but also recognizing that characters, people in the real world, are unbelievably cagey, right? In a conversation, you don't reveal everything that's behind it. You don't reveal all your innermost thoughts. You don't reveal your motivations. You don't reveal quite often. The motivations we articulate are completely contrary to the real motivations that we have. So, and I'm not saying that it's duplicitous, but there's two levels, right? And so subconsciously, quite often that happens. You can verbalize an excuse or a reason or a motivation, when in fact it's something else entirely different.
Yeah.
I think it's just how our psychology works.
And
Yeah, I
then,
find as a
oh,
reader, I am frustrated when I've already gotten to the conclusion, and then the author feels the need to spell it out for
Yeah.
me. And I heard somebody say like audiences love to realize to come to the conclusion that 2 + 2 = 4.
Mm-hmm.
And I think your math is a little more sophisticated than that, but I think
Not
even
by much.
yeah.
so for Tavore, uh, it just as a quick follow-up, because she is so fascinating. I mean, her caginess especially is like everybody's trust in her that they place, or just like the soldiers' duty. They're like, I'm following her. There's been this relationship that's building. Do you feel like you, while you were writing her, were sort of missing that relationship, or have you spent a lot of time with her, sort of off screen, out of book, getting to know her mind? And was there ever a time that you had scenes that you had written and then you were like, not yet. These ones do get edited out, or she was always like, we'll never know. She's always going to have the wall.
Yeah, she's always going to have the wall. Once you get to the end of the Crippled God, we can revisit this, because I think the position that you will take the next time you ask these questions will be very different from what they are right now. So, and I think it's valuable. But the only hint I'll give you is there's a strong meta element to holding off on Tavore that relates to the entire series. It's kind of like a small example that is reflective of the entire series itself. So, but there's also I know when if I'm writing that kind of character, it's probably my most enjoyable writing experience. I mean, every scene with Tavore, I simply loved writing it. I adored it. And precisely because it allowed me to indulge, if you will, the mystery of this other person, rather than trying to, get into the mind. Think of it in the real world. Trying to get into the mind of this other person, whoever you've met. Sometimes the mystery of them is far more enjoyable to experience than actually sort of getting down to, who this person is, right down to their core. That's my sense. Okay, so Tavore sort of became representative of that, was that sense of mystery, which fortunately was extremely useful for what I was writing and my intentions of the entire 10 books. So she ended up, in many ways, I as the writer was adding burdens to her that none of you guys could see, but I was aware of them, and I could just keep piling on burden after burden onto this character, knowing that she would withstand it, but knowing also there are some scenes that are coming in The Crippled God that were in my head right from the beginning, and they are, for me, anyways. I know even as I was writing towards them, I was getting increasingly nervous because they had lived in my head for so long. I didn't know if I could pull it off on the page. But so then I realized that I was carrying that emotional burden alongside Tavore, and that made me feel very, very close to the one character into whose head I never got. It's actually the one I became closest to. It's kind of strange. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's
Lovely.
Really cool. We've talked a lot about this notion of convergence at the end of the novels. And obviously that happens again in Dust of Dreams, but multiple characters you have calling it out for being stupid, for being just a complete coincidence, and almost angry at how dumb the series of events are. And then we have that incredibly beautiful, I thought, sort of short anecdote that the Queen gives to kind of contextualize all of it, of just, how all of these disparate little moments can lead to the death of someone. Can you talk a little bit about making that choice at the end of this novel after you've had all these convergences that are, but that's intentional? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just the point was, and again, we have to think in terms of metafictional aspects to it. The convergence, which became articulated as something that the characters within that world, or at least some of them, were aware of, right? Power draws power, and et cetera, et cetera. In a meta sense, that is an unavoidable plot device for pretty much any story you can think of, right? Any film you've watched, everything is actually converging, and that's the climax of the story. So, in a structural sense, convergence is built into all of our storytelling. It's just there, and so within this thing here, Cam and I are creating this secondary world where that is actually acknowledged. It's recognized as it's part of that world building. And of course, we use gods and forces to metaphorically represent the convergence of certain events leading to climactic scenes. So it's a meta element that is then made literal in the Malazan world. But at a certain point, if you were to live in a world like that, you would end up getting pretty pissed off, right? And so, I mean, as a person, you would, because you would feel as if some kind of narrative ploy or plot is being imposed on your life. And we do not live, Freytag's pyramid. That's not how our lives work. I think we have a longing for it sometimes, a sense of reaching towards a climactic, heightened moment in our lives.
A purpose, right?
A purpose, or a purpose realized, if you will.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I think we tend not to think about is that following that there's a denouement. There's even if it's not sort of a climax to a plot in a dramatic sense, modern literary writers would describe it more as epiphany, right? It reaches an epiphany. But then you got the denouement. Now, what happens if you're living in the denouement, right? The denouement is the slow, you have to peak. Here's the climactic moment of your life, and now you're just sort of doing this. It's like, what's the purpose of that, right? Is all your great deeds? Is it a question of all your great deeds are now behind you? And so, it's not a thing. I think a reasonable, sane person would want to live with. And so, I guess by the 9th book, that frustration was starting to sort of, push its way to the surface. And I know I've described earlier on that as you get closer to the 10th book, me as a person, I come closer to the surface of the story.
Yeah.
And so it's that bedrock is sort of breaking through a bit more often as we're proceeding. And so when you get towards the end of the book, everything flips, right? It's basically saying there's a randomness to our existence that can really, I mean, it's the opposite of convergence. It's just bad luck, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So,
you set up so beautifully also these wonderful subversions of expectation. Len and I were talking on the show about all of these moments at the end, like Masan Galani, riding to get the Kisware, riding to get the even the burned tears. Maybe we're going to come in and swoop in and save the day, and it just nothing works. And you have this horrible, this real, Empire Strikes Back ending. Where, but I think that is also, another one of those examples in the series that you do so well of that, taking the tropes that we expect and subverting that. Were all of those moments specifically intended to sort of misdirect the reader?
Yeah. It's setting up to knock it down, basically. And the other thing, of course, is if one wants um, the full breadth of an emotional cathartic response to something, you cannot jump ahead. You cannot cheat on this one. You can't get straight to the action. You have to actually do the slow burn on that approach. And I think, of course, the thing is, quite often, traditionally, that is leading up to the heroic moments of, uh, pulling your ass out of the fire and saving everything.
Yeah.
But it can also happen in the instance where none of that is achieved, and that seems to be, that's where I realize that's where Dust of Dreams has to. That's what the cutoff point is. That sense. So you don't know what's coming, and you don't know what the resolutions are at this point. And so that's the second half of the novel, which is the Cliff of God. Yeah.
So one of the things I noticed about
Jesus.
this book, both in the actual context of what is there and sort of the meta context, is that faith kind of seems to play a big part in this in different ways. So, Caliph building faith with the Kachin Mali and their faith in her and that she can sort of do this job that they need to do. The Malazans having faith in Tavore, or at least in Quick Ben and Fiddler's sort of opinions of her, or like their deductions. The elder gods sort of leveraging the faith of their followers to do their little things that they're working on. Badal's faith in words and through the poems and her own fully untested abilities. And then even you sort of, to some extent, asking for faith in your readers that the part 2 of this is going to bring it all around. Was this an intentional thread of faith, even in those secular groups, as we get closer and closer to this giant clash with the gods? Or is the nature of like, gods are coming, the ones are being set free, and some we're trying to kill each other, we have this war, and so faith is intrinsically a part of that?
Wow. Again, it's a question really worth revisiting after the Cliff of God.
This is a tough one. This is a tough interview.
All right, I'll note it for later.
No, it's okay. It's all of the above, basically. And that's why you're going to get tired of the word meta, but that is kind of part of it. It's, it is sort of asking of the reader to have faith to perpetuate or to continue in this process. But also it's an acknowledgement of me holding on to my faith that the reader will do so. Right? So both of those are at play. But in many ways, the entire series is an examination of the crisis of faith. It's woven through everything, and at the same time, it is certainly not reaching any satisfying conclusions. It is simply articulating the dilemma, if you will, the questions that each of us face, on a fairly regular basis. And as reality continues to sort of impose and create problems and impositions and tragedies, how do we live with that? How do we deal with that? And so, you have all these characters that are wrestling with those big questions, but in a more specific sense, because that makes it more tactile and I guess sort of you can hold the questions at a distance because of the specifics of the details. So like Caliph and dealing with a bunch of bipedal lizards, that's held at a fair distance, but she's still dealing with those same very, very universal questions regarding especially the question of who to have faith in, right? Because it's one thing to say, to acknowledge or to recognize or to whatever, articulate a god. It's quite another to articulate or recognize faith in a fellow human being, right? Those are,
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same scale, but
Yeah.
there are two very different things. And so all of that is definitely part of the strain that's running through the entire series.
I want to talk a little bit about Icarium and the device you use throughout this novel to express his inner turmoil journey process. It's so unconventional. I think it's interesting and challenging to the reader on a certain level. And did you intend it to sort of be a puzzle for the reader to unlock?
I did. I didn't know it would be as puzzling as it was for a lot of readers. But I mean, there are sort of two elements to that. On the one hand, you've got a single character who has absorbed multiple other souls. But then it goes one further where those souls are not represented as the ghost-like, non-corporeal occupants of this one body, but the sense that is Icarium, the original part, has been disassociated from his body. So he's the ghost and they aren't. And so there's kind of a double thing going on there. That may have been one too many. Right? I may have just done one or the other. But I was hoping that there was enough given away, even in the prologue, where you have this extended conversation from all these entities, all these people. But then I think it's something flying overhead, looking down on a single person. I thought that would be enough to let people know that he's got a lot of voices in his head.
Right.
I feel like that was always there, but then it was one of those things that was, you'd like talk about it and talk through the situation because they're doing very tactile activities in his mind. And so like the physicality of what they're doing, it's easy to like slip out of that knowledge because when I thought it was incredibly clear in the prologue, but then my brain is so slippery and rotten that it would just like slide out and then I'd be just sort of taking everything for what it was. I actually felt more than so many other books. There were lots of scenes that left Jeff and I being like, the answers feel like they're on the tip of our tongue. We should know this name, this place, this event. And if once it's being referenced, if we had just a little bit of a better memory, we could get there, but we didn't. After 9, go ahead.
No, I think yes and no. And that may be the other issue is that I don't remember right now, but I don't think all of the occupant souls were necessarily all characters in the books. I might be wrong. So that may have obfuscated things for you a fair bit. So, if you're sensing, yeah, I should know that character,
Right.
that may be one of the characters that that just wasn't there.
Right.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I may, and I don't remember, to be perfectly honest. But I know, Taxilian was there and Featherwitch and Rotto's Hivanar, and so I know those ones, but I don't remember if there were other ones I threw in there. So.
Yeah, we have the heinous hardtack once again. You said that all the people in Icarium's head are people that we've met. Can you specify who these are? The other ones are Sheb, Asan, Last, and Nappet.
Oh, right.
We didn't tell you there was going to be a quiz.
Yeah,
No.
sorry.
That's the other problem, of course, is those names are once removed from the character. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
I'll say this. After 9 big books and so much information, what are your hopes for the way your readers interact when they have moments like this? To go back and study and try and piece it together? Or is it a little treat for people who happen to hold it all in their, expansive mind palaces?
Oh, wow. That would have to be pretty extraordinary mind palace. I mean, just thinking about, I'm still thinking on that question. I think what I did was I gathered up all the souls that were close to Icarium in the capital city in Leather, who died to the collapsing buildings.
Right.
I think those are primarily Featherwitch was hanging around anyways, but the other ones are all sort of immediate vicinity. So and I think that was my plan anyway. So I would have to go back to those scenes in Reaper's Gale, and I suspect if they are to be found, they will be found in Icarium's sort of beginning of his own uh, ritual of creating new warrants, basically.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
I think it's your turn, Lana.
Oh, I think you should do your sci-fi question. I realize I'm like, I have so many questions, and I'm like, oh, they're all about one particular scene.
Well, we'll get there.
Oh,
We'll
are
get there.
they? Okay.
I think he knows where we're headed. We can get there. So we've talked to you before about your love of sci-fi. You've written sci-fi novels, a sci-fi series. It seems like there's more sci-fi in Dust of Dreams than any time before in Malazan. And I was, the sci-fi battle at the end, the battle scene with ships coming out of I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about melding sci-fi into this fantasy world. Did you think about that as a challenge, or was that just an
Oh yeah.
opportunity?
No, that's a huge challenge.
Yeah.
But it's a challenge because I was holding to a certain fidelity, and that fidelity actually arrived in the very early gaming of this. So when I played the character, one of my first characters. I think the first I ever wrote up was Animator Rake. When he discovers Moonspawn, so Cam is running the game. When he discovers Moonspawn, Cam basically made it very clear that this was primarily mechanical in its construct. So there was a science fiction element, anti-gravity type stuff built in to Moonspawn. And so once you've got this singular entity, what I didn't realize at the time, Cam obviously knew, was that it was a badly damaged version of Skykeeps, and there were other Skykeeps out there. So once sort of all of that kind of unfolded in the games, then the question then was, well, okay, how do you integrate that into what is pretty much a fantasy realm with swords and shields and armor? And then it was the question of with the Kachin Chamal, because I think Cam created Moonspawn, but I think I created the Kachin Chamal. So this is kind of how we game. Is that he might set something up that I would then occupy, if you will, and fill up the spaces. I would draw maps that he would then fill in the details on that continental map and the stories behind it. So it was always back and forth. We were handing each other things that they could work with, each of us could work with. So then it was a question of, well, Kachin Chamal, given the anatomical limitations of, basically reptilian jaw and etc., how do they communicate? And at that point, then you realize that they have to communicate through other means, especially if they're going to be sophisticated enough to build these giant floating machines. So that's just sort of, it required a kind of creating an elaborate social structure and biologically derived social structure for the Kachin Chamal. And yeah, it was great fun. It's nice to throw that in there. But then, of course, the question of communication with humans becomes problematic, right? So So there was clearly a built-in mystery. I mean, the first time we meet Kachin Jamal, they're undead, so
Yeah.
they don't really count because they're certainly not able to um, communicate via scent or whatever, glands or whatever, whatever it is they're doing, because they're undead. So yeah.
Yeah.
But later on, so I knew that was coming, and that I was going to have to delve into the Kachin Jamal culture because, once they've been introduced, they deserve that much at least. So we'd already done the Talana Mass, especially with Memories of Ice. We've been kind of doing the Jagut all the way through, getting more and more of them. Taistandi. So, all of these other species had all had their time on the stage. So, there's two left, right? There's the Kachin Chamal and the Forker Sail.
Yeah.
So, and you know where you're heading on the Forker Sail in the 10th book.
Yeah. I loved the Stormy and Gesler, just the flash at the end of the book of getting them in there, and being with Calith and her building relationship, and because she's human, there is like a humanness to the way that they talk about things, and that it just sort of levels the conversation out and makes it very approachable, and you're thinking more about the bigger concepts of like the faith of like their belief in this other person and blah blah blah. But when Stormy and Gesler get in, they're like, there's friggin' lizards everywhere. They like become like oh no, that's the actual human reaction. They have not been embedded in the culture. No, and you talk about the choice to make them get the stink on them, then you'll get to have the talkies with them. Can you talk about making
couple
them
of knuckleheads?
I mean, classically irreverent in the way that the Malazans tend to be, but I adored that.
Well, again, I think it's a payoff that can only be effective if you've set it up over a long period of time. And I don't mean setting up Stormy and Gesler, because we know what they're like. We've already known since Deadhouse Gates, I guess. But the setup actually is Calith, and Calith is completely alone. She's the only human interacting with all these things, so she can't have conversations. She can't sort of suss things out with another human being. And so a lot of her storyline leading up to that is one of intense frustration. And I'm recognizing that the reader is probably fairly frustrated with this as well, because also Calith is the last of her tribe, so she's got all this residual guilt that she's carrying with her, survivor guilt, but also a sense of condemnation, if you will. Did my people deserve what happened to them? Maybe they did. So she's dealing with all these kinds of fairly traumatic things, and then is in the midst of this alien culture that communicates very differently and has its own motivations. And so it's a very tightly tangled sort of ball of storyline that with Caliph that runs through. So when you finally get to the delivery of release of all that tension, there's nobody better than somebody like Stormy and Gesler, because as you say, they're absolutely irreverent. And so they arrive, and it just it explodes, right? It's like, you remember the core of a golf ball? Have you ever seen that little wrapped up thing? Yeah. Just imagine when Gesler and Stormy arrive, it just bursts.
Yeah.
But that was Caliph all along, right?
Yeah. So it also is one of those things where at the end of the book, I could feel it being like, if I didn't know there was book 10, I'm the person who would be ready to write you. Something about it being primarily through Stormy and Gesler's eyes that we see that, and they're like, it seems like everybody's dead. It like also took some of like the fear and like the sting away from that. And maybe I'm also like, fool me once, Steven. I don't know if everybody's actually dead there, buddy boy. And maybe they are, there's a lot of people that die in the books too, but it's so interesting to have this very dramatic thing happening still through the lens of these two sort of goofballs. I gotta know, did you know when Stormy was referenced as the shield animal, or the way back that he was specifically the shield anvil for our lizard friends? Or was he like a shield anvil in reserve until it was like, this is his people?
Maybe a bit of both. But I knew that at some point, he was going to have to be pushed into that role. And it's far from complete, but that's where he's positioned now. Yeah.
I noticed in Dust of Dreams there seems to be even more poetry in the novel than you had previously. A lot of poetry throughout all of the novels, and wonderful poetry, I would say too. But I feel like it came even more to the fore here, and especially with a character who speaks only in poetry. And I'm wondering if you approach the writing of poetry in a different way than you approach prose, or what's that process when you're sitting down and going, "Now today I need to write a poem to start the novel," or whatever it is?
Is it different? Yeah, it's different in the sense of, at least for me, when I'm doing my poetry, is it's as if the theme arrives before anything else, right? So what I'm doing is I'm kind of dispensing with the intermediary, that would be narrative prose, and going straight to, I guess, some core elements of that theme. And that's kind of how I approach writing poetry, is kind of strip away those conventions, and then you can go straight to it. And Badal, that's for me, anyways. It was a comfortable way to blend the two, because she's on the snake, and so if you visualize that as this long line of refugee children, I think the inspiration came from Sudan, here in our world at that time. That is a built-in narrative line. It's a narrative structure that's just physically in place, and it's slowly moving across this novel. And so you've got the head of the snake, and you've got Badal and her voice, and the way she sees the world, which is having stripped away that kind of structured narrative prose element to her. So she sees everything directly from that thematic position, and that's kind of what shapes her language. Chances are it was somewhat infectious, and so it spread into other things. And so the beginning of a lot of chapters related to that. But also, I was using, on a personal level, I was using that poetry to reconcile a lot of the grief I was feeling following my father's death in Toll the Hounds, when I was writing Toll the Hounds.
Yeah.
So, and I found poetry to be a bit more effective to engage with that level of feeling, personal feeling. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's a bit more prevalent in the 9th, and I think the 10th book. I haven't looked, but I suspect that's there's a slow merging of the poetic with the prose as the series goes on. Anyways, at least in my sense. So that's probably why there's a little bit more poetry.
When you attribute a poem that's an epigraph to someone in universe, do you know before you start the poem that that's the author of that poem, or do you get to the end of the poem and go, that seems like a
yeah? Well, only actually for Fisher. Generally, if I come at the end of the poem and then I look back over it and I go, oh yeah, okay, that's Fisher. But other ones, I may make something up. One of the things I discovered really early on, my first workshop class ever at the University of Manitoba, was a poetry workshop. And I don't want to be, it's going to sound critical. Anyways, a lot of poetry that I was seeing in that class, and I mean, my stuff was rubbish, but a lot of a lot of what I was seeing was quite, it had the sense of being therapeutic for the author,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I don't find that particularly problematic. I think each of us needs to use whatever, whatever is at hand, what is available to us, in order to work out our place in this world and how we see ourselves. But I remember occasionally I would stumble onto, and then I started reading a lot of poetry, and I would stumble onto something where the poet did something that was quite prose-like in the sense of the voice of the voice that's behind the poem is not the author; it's a character, and I really that's sort of I got attracted to that idea. And so that's why throughout this series we have multiple characters who are writing their poems. It's not Steven Erikson. It's not any in-world um, single character that is overriding all of these things.
Right.
Um,
Is that a mask for you, or is that
sure, but
yeah?
it's also it's a deliberate shifting of point of view, so that that poem can express sentiments and feelings that I don't have, right?
Right.
But it can do it with hopefully as much veracity and authenticity as that voice can carry, that character can carry. And so that I always found that it kind of freed me up in terms of what I was going to write as. Otherwise, if you're writing all of your poetry as self-analysis, if you will, I think you can spiral into a fairly dark place and not be able to get out. But using poetry once removed, in a sense, like placing that point of view character in between you and what's on the page, is quite liberating in a lot of ways, and you can explore things that you wouldn't otherwise approach.
So cool.
For what it's worth.
It's so amazing. I'd like to even think of that as just a technique for someone that's not building a universe of characters, but just is sitting down to write a single poem. To do that as a technique just seems so empowering almost. And
it is.
I never.
It's liberating. It is.
Yeah.
Because you're no longer sweating through confession, right? You know what I mean? If the poem is confessional. Also, quite often, if that confessional element is extremely emotionally charged, you then can lose your objectivity in terms of making sure the poem works structurally. Yeah.
So one of the things I noticed over the course of the novels, and I think a big part of that is that, like, who's providing the epigraph, is we used to have a lot more of the sort of blips from the historians. We had sort of the textbook history snippets. The one that sticks out really potently in my mind is the one that was like, retro, where it was like, yeah, all the Malazans actually did bad and the Empress is great. Like the right before all the Malazans get got by the Empress, or right after, in that same sort of time period. Did you find doing the historians, when we were like no longer with the historians, it was more important to be close to have historians on hand providing those pieces? And now that the historians aren't hanging out with us and we're in, the poems felt like they were more impactful or more relevant? Or was there a deliberate moving away from using those historian clips for the epigraphs?
No, it's a moving away. That's one of the other things that's explored a lot in the series is the role of history and the role of the historian. So, but one of the key elements to this, I don't think this spoils too much, is we're moving away from the capacity to witness what's about to happen. So there are no historians there to see this. And so that's probably why you're seeing fewer of those excerpts. Probably, I haven't looked, but it wouldn't surprise me if most of those last few half dozen of those, if they showed up, relate to Letheri Empire kind of stuff. because that's where we are, and then we're now leaving that place, and we're moving into a place where there is no. It gives too much away. No, okay, yeah. All I can say is we're moving away from the witnessing thereof, in world, not for the reader. The reader's going to witness it all, but in world, the witnessing thereof is slowly dwindling away.
Yeah, if a soldier accidentally gets caught in a battle in the wastelands and nobody's there to see it,
does it make a sound?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good
question, isn't it?
I very much appreciate the self-censorship. I will just say that.
Yeah.
But it makes me incredibly excited for what's coming. All right, Lana, why don't we dive into the...
You didn't want to ask this one last one because then they kind of connect.
Okay. All right. It connects. Okay. So I just want to talk just briefly about our friend Sunrise. I think one of the standout characters of this novel. And there's someone in the Discord, forgive me for not crediting the name, but there's somebody in the Discord who pointed out that not only is Sunrise a sort of, evokes a positive image, but it's also something that is brief and we can't hold on to and goes away all too quickly. I just wondering if you had any specific recollection of the inspiration for that character, if there's anything you wanted to say about Sunrise in particular.
Oh man, this is many years ago now.
Yeah.
I wanted to empower naming. Okay, so part of it's kind of it's not explicit. Well, maybe it is explicit. I don't know. But there is an empowerment that's built into the Malazan, especially Marine practice of renaming people. I think it actually can be seen in our world, in Vietnam War literature, where soldiers are given new names, if you will.
Yeah.
And I think there's something quite profound to that. And so in the case of Sunrise, the changing of the name has this massive altering effect on his personality. And I guess I kind of like the cleanliness of that. I like the simplicity of that. And it was fun to take a character that up to that point had a certain voice, internal voice that we got, and then just flip it and just see how basically he unfolds, like a flower almost, or a sunrise, and so yeah, it's quite deliberate and direct. But I kind of, so much of what I'm writing is intentionally not deliberate and correct.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
So it's a nice contrast in a sense. And it matches well with Hedges' almost oversimplistic reinvention of the bridge burners, right?
Yeah.
So it all fits quite nicely. Having said that, I don't know if I created Sunrise for the sole purpose of immediately killing him off. I think when that moment when it arrived, it felt absolute. Absolutely, I have to do that.
Yeah.
So maybe I don't remember, but I'd say maybe 5 pages before or 2 days before in the writing process, I knew that I would have to do that.
Well, on to less sunny topics. I cannot leave this conversation without discussing one of the most potent and memorable scenes in the book, which is, of course, the hobbling of Hetan. We were obviously very moved with this scene. It's incredibly dark, obviously, and very real and powerful. Jeff, during the show, read through one of your comments. I think it was on the tour thing that's responding to the audience about the scene. Such a fantastic comment. Your books are not G-rated. After 9 books, was it a surprise to you that this particular violent act caused such a sharp reaction from the audience?
Yeah, a surprise. In some ways, yes. But I immediately start thinking, well, why would it have caused such a reaction? Well, I think it caused that reaction because there was a lot of reader attachment to Hetan as a character. They liked her, which then, of course,
And Tool.
raised and Tool raised in my mind a bit more of an uncharitable notion, which was that, well, if you didn't know the character, would it have less impact? Which kind of, I don't want to hear the answer to that one.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I was able to sort of think through that response and come up with at least one possibility for why it was so impactful, was that these were characters that readers had been with for a long time. And I guess, I don't know, it's, I guess it's, in that sense, it's hard to separate um, the events from that kind of reader investment in particular characters. But I certainly wanted to make it clear in the writing of it that none of them were really free to alter what became a tribal force of will, if you will. So ethologically, tribes are very small c conservative, and quite often, the rational explanation for this is that they are subsistence based, and that subsistence basis is a very fine line. So if anything disrupts the society too much, everybody can die, right? Everybody can starve. And so the mechanisms by which conformity is maintained and social control is established, there are tiers to it, and usually the corrective measures are fairly minor to begin with, right? So if a tribe is dealing with disruptive or aberrant behavior from one person, even things like samples of too much greed or possessiveness, and wealth gathering and all the rest, one of the initial mechanisms is ridicule, and quite often it's very effective. But then there are other mechanisms that sort of ratchet up depending on the crimes being committed, and sort of the very last one is exile. And ethnographically, it's been recorded that quite often exile is more often than not a death sentence. So the person is driven away from their village, and it can be so traumatic in the sense of their sense of who they are in the world, that they're out in the forest and they curl up and die. And there's no physical sort of reason for it, but they've been severed from everything that that sustains them. And so for the Barghast, I wanted to sort of indicate that it's a tribe that is quickly spiraling down. There are mechanisms within its self-definition that are actually preventing it from managing that growing crisis within that culture. And so Tool, of course, is on the outside of all that, and in that sense, he's an available target for for the expression of this explosion of violence, this night of violence. But there's you don't have to talk in terms of tribes. Those nights of violence are they're around us. Whether it's Kristallnacht, or whether it's even something as seemingly unrelated as the riots that hit Vancouver at the end of the Stanley Cup being lost to Boston. Yeah. It's just out of nowhere, right? And the participants within it, it's almost as if they've lost individual sort of will, if you will. It's just like there's this collective
mob mentality,
eruption of anarchy and dismissal of possible consequences, or even thinking about the possible consequences. But corrective mechanisms like that, I think, are ubiquitous. We just tend not to notice a lot of them, or we ignore them.
Yeah.
And then, what else was I going to say about that? Well, we'll leave it at that for now.
So one of the reasons I feel like it was such people even felt closer to Hetan, and like the journey that I'm going to get it wrong, the Sinan Barghest were sort of going through. When we first meet Hetan, like books and books ago, she seems like the ultimate badass. She seems so in control of her life and her body. And at least to the same degree as any other Barghest that we'd met at the time. And as a result, the story of the Barghest through this book in particular feels like a bit of a turn. We've seen glimpses of it where people are like, Barghest, those are savages. And Hetan's like, let's go bang. Is she the exception to that? Or is like the way that she presented herself when we first met her, looking back, is that the resilience that she's needed to display to be like a boys' club, to be one of the soldiers that are part of this?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, she's an exception in the sense that I think, for most of this series, is the only Barghest woman that we get to know, as it were. You start meeting others in Dust of Dreams, and so there's certainly individuality in these people. So, despite the fact that the social structure is so entrapping, if you will, but I mean, social structures are entrapping for all of us. So but she's it may also have been an issue that I don't know if this is true, but this question may have come up in my head when I was creating the ending of the series, is what to do with the Barghest. Because I'd landed them there. Their desire for some kind of cultural resolution, if you will, was set up way back in Memories of Ice. And then I landed them on the shores of, because we have that whole thing with the buried boats and all the rest. So everything was kind of set up, and then was the question of, well, okay, what can I do with the Barghest? Are they going to be part of this march to the east, or what? Yeah. And then I was dealing with also where was I going to position Tool?
That was my next question.
Yeah, and so his journey in a sense is almost it's kind of a slightly deformed mirror image of Talk the Younger. So his return to life is mirrored by Talk's plunge into death, and so they kind of reverse themselves, even though they're and then they meet up, and it's not a great meeting. So it was a question of what to do with Tool, but it was also, I wanted to explore the mechanisms by which culture controls its members. And historically, hobbling is, for all I know, it's a practice still being, committed somewhere. But it was
Hmm.
certainly committed in the United States regarding the slaves and escaped slaves. Um, so it's not that distant, in
Yeah.
terms of
Yeah.
time or space. Um, so the level of, yeah, I guess the shock that. So now I was thinking, well, is it just the hobbling that was it, or was it the ritualized um, destruction of Hetan on a physical and spiritual level? And it's probably
Yeah.
all of these things. They
I
Yeah.
all
think
played
so. Yeah.
into it.
How quickly I mean, that was the thing that like
She surrenders
really
pretty quickly,
punched.
doesn't she?
Yeah.
She immediately how much she pulls it on herself. But even that is part of like the social um contract that they have, that conversation that Bacall and Esterol have, that talks about this dynamic between women and men, where women and men of the Barghest, where he's like, why do the women participate in this? I've opened my eyes. This is horrible. Like, why
Yeah.
are the women about it when they're the ones that this is going to happen to in the future? And her pointing out, like, if it's them, it's not me. And that
Yeah,
self-preservation,
yeah,
and how quickly that, like, other women and everybody telling you this is like your fault, that you could immediately become so destroyed to be like, you're right, I deserve this.
yeah. Exile would certainly have that same effect, right? So
Hmm.
um, you would think, well, okay, you've been kicked out of the village. It doesn't mean you have to curl up and die. You can wander off for 1,000 miles and find something else, but that's not how it works usually. Um, so yeah, there is that kind of sense of everybody's reaffirming their place and their understanding of where they are within that culture, within that society. Um, I mean, look at foot binding, right?
Yeah.
Historically, it was the mothers binding their children, their
Hmm.
daughters' feet. So uh, it's complicated. I mean, the practices are what they are.
Hmm.
You look at uh, the female genital mutilation that was explored in House of Chains, and that one also triggered, or rather, initiated a pretty visceral reaction among a lot of readers. Um, but to what extent would they have been um, riled up if it had been male genital
Hmm.
mutilation, which is something that's been prevalent in our culture for 2,000 years here in the West.
Hmm.
Um, so in a way, it's all about just sort of asking those questions and exploring that idea. But you're right. It's it's a harsh scene, and um, when you get to those, me as a writer, when I get to those things, I can sense myself, pulling way back, like spiritually pulling way back, um, and just being the camera that records,
Yeah.
and just laying it out. Um, that way, there's no risk of me indulging anything. I'm there to record this event, and so I just recorded it.
Yeah, that was one of sort of Jfred 88's questions from the Discord, was how do you immerse yourself in the creation of something so dark and harrowing? How do you deal with the emotions of it while not losing sight of the reason you're doing it, and trusting that the audience will understand what you're trying to do?
Yeah, yeah. It's like I say, it's not easy. We look at people who deal with like emergency response people and the
Yeah.
trauma that they step into on a regular basis. Um, they will tell you that in order, like in an ER or whatever, in order to deal with that, you have to dissociate yourself. Um, it's
Hmm.
like you become almost an automaton. You've got the skill levels that you then apply to deal with the crisis at hand.
Hmm.
Um, and then at the end of the day, you step out of the ER, or you step out of the car and you head home, and that stuff doesn't go away, right? So the dissociation is a temporary measure that we engage in order to get the job done, in order to do what needs doing. But you can't just shrug that stuff off. And so it's true. It's so in the sense of me writing the scene, I dissociated stylistically, or at least it's expressed stylistically, but it's a complete emotional dissociation, right? I'm just reporting what's occurring. But then at the end of it all, I have to keep reminding myself that this is just fiction. I just wrote fiction. That's all I did. Right? Hetan does not exist as a person. Tool does not exist as a person, and in a sense, that's my means of coping, and acknowledging that, or not acknowledging, but of accepting the fact that there will be scenes that I write that if I were to absorb them as if they were real, would be devastating.
Yeah. Well,
so
go
real
ahead.
quick, that I think for as harrowing and difficult to read as that scene was, it continues, right? Because then you have you don't let the reader off the hook either. With you have these saviors that are coming in to rescue her, and each of them meeting their demise also ignominiously, and just you keep, as the reader, just latching onto the next thing, like, okay, maybe there. And I like how there's no easy answers. There's never any easy answers. But I'm wondering if you. Oh, go ahead.
No, that was a small scene that foreshadowed the end of the book. Right. If you think about it,
right.
All of these things coming to try to do something and failing. Yeah. That's foreshadowing what's coming. Yeah.
Do you think of Hetan's final sort of shell of ice and her final resting place? I mean, maybe you don't want to come down one way or the other and allow that to be the reader's interpretation, but do you think of it as some sort of positive? I don't even know if that's the right framing, but any
merciful,
any mercy for her? Yeah.
I really cannot comment because you have not completed this series.
Oh, okay.
So
save that one for later.
Yeah,
fair enough.
Yeah, I think so. But yes, there's certainly a protective element to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the one last thing I was going to say about this is one of the things I so value, speaking of like that poetry being like, hey, that's like one step removed to thinking about something that could be really painful. This being something where you're sort of putting readers through something that is a harrowing thing, and even inviting the conversation of like, well, why was that so harrowing? I don't necessarily want to know everybody's individual answers to how or why they reacted to this, but having the opportunity to be like, if you care about Hetan, maybe you should care about other real humans. It's like, so I just so appreciate bringing things like this to light with people who might not otherwise, they might otherwise just be in their little bubbles of the world, and being able to like bring people out and being like, why would you write this? It's like, well, it exists. It's history. It's modern. It's contemporary things probably happening on Earth right now. And I so value that you don't shy away from stuff like this, and the way that you approach it in that very as objective possible, just the cameraman and not indulgently. I just really have a lot of appreciation for that exploration. So thank you.
Well, thank you, but it's also unappreciated in the sense by other people that they thought they were reading escapist literature. And but my thought was, well, by the ninth book, you kind of should know that.
Try to keep up here.
Yeah, that's not the case.
We're all in here to examine dark reality.
For the ninth book, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Another, I think, major theme of this one is extinction, and I read that you had been reading a lot on extinction while you were writing Dust of Dreams. Was that something that crept in because of your
Sure.
preoccupation with that at the time, or was that something that was you knew you were where you were headed?
Well, there was a little bit of both, because I knew the wolves were going to play a role. But no, it's what I've always sort of tried to describe to people, that every novel is in conversation with the present in which it was written. And it doesn't matter if it's a fantasy or a science fiction or whatever, it is still in conversation with the real world around the author at the time. And so this is one of the areas where sort of I don't agree with a lot of critical analysis that removes from the life of the author and the time at which that was written. They are interwoven. They are inextricably connected. And so one has to take into account, at least from my thinking, of the context in which something is created. It just, to me, it seems obvious, but a lot of people doing the academic side of criticism may not agree with me on that one. So, anyways, it's just that stuff and it's throughout the entire series, and it's present in virtually every book I write. That there is something of what's going on in the real world at that time that's impinging on me, that I'm aware of, anyways. That is then filtering through the narrative of the story and coming onto the page somewhere.
You're someone that seems to be so in control of your themes and your what you want to express. Just kind of following that line of thinking. Do you subscribe to the notion that of finding meaning in a work of art that the author didn't intend?
Well, I certainly have no issue with somebody finding meaning that the author didn't intend. But if I'm teaching a workshop and I'm talking about this to an author, to a writer, I would say one of the things you want to look for as you write is to make sure that the wrong meaning isn't taken from what you write. And so you then have to do some self-examination and question your premises and your assumptions, but also the means, the specifics in which you are conveying ideas and themes in your work. So in other words, be mindful of the possible interpretations. You cannot control all of that. You cannot predict how people are going to interpret your work.
Yeah.
But at least be aware of it. And the reason why I say that is, if you are aware of it, you can then be very deliberate in what you are writing to take the reader to the right place. And as long as it's consistent all the way through, taking the reader to that right place, then you've done your job. And so the idea of writing and rewriting and revising is, for me, to ensure that everything is consistent in taking the reader to at least the place that you intended, bearing in mind that the reader may not go there, right? Like you said, the reader may interpret it somewhat differently. But if challenged, if the author is then challenged, saying, well, I read this into this thing you wrote, you have the ammunition to counter and say, no, this is exactly what I was doing here, here, and here, and this is my intention.
Yeah.
If you're entirely seat of the pants gut writer, um, that's fine for the creative process. That's fine for first draft. But at a certain point, you have to stop being that. You cannot rely on your instincts all the time on this, because if you are challenged, you cannot defend your position, right? Because you've not articulated it in your own mind.
Yeah.
So the revisions need to be, for me anyways, this is what I recommend. Those revisions need to be that side of the brain that is rational, logical, and analytical. The creative stuff can precede that in your first drafts and all the rest. But now you actually have to get down to making sure that everything that's in there is in there for a reason, and it is clear and sharp where it needs to be, and ambivalent or ambiguous in other places where it needs to be that. So yeah, it's almost as if you write your first draft and then you sit down a week later, give it some time, and deconstruct it, and deconstruct what you've written for the sole purpose of making sure that the next version, the next draft, does everything you want it to do.
Have you ever surprised yourself in your first drafts with what has come out the other side, theming wise, or
Yeah. And that's part of the pleasure of writing, right? Is to stumble onto something. I remember, Jeff, you mentioned, I think you read even as a quote, there's a whole sequence there that's discussing omnipotence in God. I mean, that was just like, whoa, where did that come from? When I was writing it. But since you've reminded me, that's been haunting me for days, ever since, actually. Yeah.
I read a quote recently from the poet William Butler Yeats that made me think of your work, and I would love to get your reaction to it. And you've likely heard it before, but I hadn't. Basically, he says, we make out of the quarrel with others rhetoric, but of the quarrel with ourselves poetry. And I found that to be so powerful, and it is something that is so inspirational about how you write, which seems to be, as you say, in dialogue with yourself and the current state of the world, and in dialogue with the reader, and that this notion of characters working through their own stuff, but forcing the reader to kind of challenge their assumptions, and how there are no blacks and whites. It's all shades of gray in these novels. Anyway, I was wondering if you have a reaction to that.
Yeah. Well, I'm a huge fan of Yeats, anyways. In fact, I think there's the Song of Dreaming. One of the poems in Dust of Dreams is very much a consequence of me reading a whole bunch of Yeats just before that. So, interestingly,
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's for me. That was always the exercise in writing fiction, which I kind of stumbled on really early on in the writing program here in University of Victoria, here in Victoria, where none of the themes that I began with in starting a story survived the writing of the story. Not one, not one. But I was so tied into those themes that the dismantling of them was it was almost traumatic. And so it was as if with each story I wrote, and I remember talking to my mentor at the time, each story I wrote just tore me to pieces at the end of it. Everything was dismantled, and I had to rebuild and start over again for the next story, and for not just the next story. Well, actually for the next story, because I was writing nonstop, basically. And so it was part of my process of rebuilding myself with each story that I wrote. And yeah, he did sort of convey to me that was slightly unusual. But it felt I had no choice. It was relentless. And to this day, that relentlessness, which is inwardly turned, persists. So yeah, I think there is a therapeutic function, at least in the creation of art, that cannot be discounted, and is of huge value to the artist. But it's also traumatic as hell.
Yeah.
Well, we are all the beneficiaries of that relentlessness. I will say that, and so it's such a treat. I can't believe we're turning the corner on the final tale of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and
Have you guys started? You started reading it?
No,
I have. I don't know if
You have?
Lana has. I have.
I will absolutely start in Wednesday next week.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about it, and yeah, it's always such a treat to have you on the show. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your
Well,
time.
thank you.
Any final words to, send us off on our final voyage?
If you think that this is heading for a dark place, it isn't.
Great.
For what that's worth.
Love it.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Steven.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you for watching. We will be back next week with our first 2 chapters of The Crippled God.
Looking forward to it.